So earlier session, we talked about, talent gap in an ecosystem, but it's actually even more severe in a startup system because people who are experiencing scaled manufacturing are not in startups, but probably in your corporations. And they never think about going into startups. So it's one of the even more severe gaps that we have here. And that gives a good segue to a question to Andy because his organization promotes big corporates to startup collaborations. And I heard that you guys also recently get into more collaborations in manufacturing sector. So can you share some more about that?
Yeah, I'm considered lucky to bring these corporate innovation services of plug and play to this particular phase of the country embracing transformation and innovation. So because a lot more corporates are more open to actually listening to our value proposition, where all this while they do not feel that they can collaborate, they can create value from a solution that is derived from a startup. But with that being said, a lot of hand holding, a lot of babysitting happens on my end. So I babysit and handhold the corporate. I also babysit and handhold the startups. For the corporate, I teach them what kind of scope of work to line it up for the startups. Because standard procurement, which have 12 processes and take gazillion months, won't do it for the startups. They don't have enough cash to burn in order to go through your sales cycle, procurement cycles. For the startups, I teach them what kind of professional documentation, standards that you have to prepare before you start working with corporates. And we made it work with one successful case study where Celcom DG now have offered a robotics and smart manufacturing services through a solution that they brought in from a POC and MVP with a Malaysian local manufacturing startups called Move Robotics. So it does work, but it takes a lot of ambition, perseverance from the corporate side, as well as startups must have the patience, must have the eagerness to work with corporates.
So I'm curious to hear that what was the ingredients that made that particular robotic collaboration successful?
The ingredient is me. A lot of patience to deal with many type of people from the corporate side and the startups, because the startups have their own pace, they have their own style, have their own desire and expectation towards the corporate. Corporates have the same legacy, navigating the hierarchy internal. But because I've been in both professionally, so I know how it feels. So I managed to bridge the gap, and a lot of people managing from both sides in order to navigate and create value for both ends.
Do you see corporate side of attitudes is quick to change or changeable, or it's someone like you always have to walk around?
Yeah, good question. HR actually depends with their number one. If their number one have that eye, have that eagerness, hunger to transform their organization through this particular channel, then I feel that the hurdles to overcome internally from the corporate side is a lot better. From the startup side, they are always hungry because they want access to customer. They want access to exponential growth, right? So it makes sense. And some of the startups is part of their trajectory of growing is increasing their sales, increasing their reach, especially when you talk about working with corporates that have a regional reach. So you're talking about being able to reach multiple markets with one collaboration with a corporate, right? So I feel that the challenge is more on the corporate side, but these past few years, you have seen tremendous amount of corporates starting to open. And with Plug and Pay now globally, we have 700 plus corporates now with us. So these 700 plus actually want to work with startups and do sometimes 2 to 4 cycles per year just recruiting startups. So they know that when they do this, there is a margin of error. There are going to be MVPs or POCs that does not work out. And they have factored that into the race. They have factored that into their sandbox. They have factored that into the communication to their stakeholder that includes board members.
Yeah, and I think if I could just add on here as well, I think most people in this room are at corporates, right? And naturally, most corporates have a innovation arm or innovation initiative internally to either work internally on new technology or work with startups and incorporate that into certain business units. I think what would be very beneficial as well is to be able to align internally on sort of the milestones or expectations when working with these startups or spinning off these startups, because most of the time, a lot of the challenges you face in it could be your manufacturing process or your supply chain process. These are things that there would be many startups out there already solving for. Like the example for this is that we deal with a lot of I'll say corporate and startup interactions as well. But at the same time, I think we have a startup in process optimization where I was in on an email chain and there were 27 people, right? There was people from the engineering team, the procurement team, there were the decision makers as well. And the thing was, you never knew who needed to respond to proceed to the next stage. So I think in terms of working with startups, I think it's also important for the corporate side as well to understand that the startups are more than willing to accommodate, especially if they're earlier, because they do need the partnership. But at the same time, not every startup founder will understand corporate speed. So I would say you have to be able to match up the expectations, because more often than not, the startups can deliver, but then also they set up the milestones rather than expect just the end product to be there within the first month or so, right? So it will be a journey.
Yeah, I actually totally agree. That's really on the corporate side or the MNC side, because sometimes we do see a misalignment there. In corporates, there's always the innovation department, right? And the innovation department are the ones that work with the startups, so I try to pull in the startups. But the innovation department, it's necessary. That's good for experimentation, but sometimes that's misalignment with the actual BU, because the KPI of the innovation department is, let's say, 5 pilots a year, but it's misaligned from the KPIs of the actual BU, where do they actually have the actual pain, or are they just throwing up problem statements or challenge statements to maybe help the innovation department with the KPI, or to help, let's say, themselves work with the enterprise Singapore's to maintain a good relationship. So I guess in the ecosystem itself, let's say governments and MNCs, governments should work to help at the supply side, the startups, instead of helping the MNCs. And the MNCs should get, the demand should be more clean and genuine. There's actual pull from the actual BUs, actual pain before working with the startups, and to get a more long-term collaboration.